This video will analyse the truth behind this meme. How accurate is it? Having analysed both dynasties in video summaries and in interviews with experts in the area, I'm in a good position to evaluate the truth of both sets of assertions. Overall, this meme is largely true, with some caveats. The Qing Manchu rulers are depicted as the beta weak male on the left. Barely any innovations or inventions. This is largely true. Any change during the Qing dynasty was largely a result of new crops from the New World or products in trade with Western powers. Despite having some long-lived, competent emperors, for example the Emperor Qianlong, the Qing was largely devoid of any innovation, either in the political area, philosophical or technological, and merely piggybacked off the order of the Ming Dynasty that it had taken over. And on the right we have the strong alpha male Ming soldier saying can still invent and innovate. The Ming restoration of true Chinese rule under Zhuangzi after the Mongol takeover oversaw some innovation, for example in the area of usage of gunpowder. And on the left this is compared to the Qing Manchu leader who would rather keep the dynasty weak than give back leadership to the Han. Like other ethnocentric elites at the top of other civilizations, it is taboo even to notice the fact that ethnic overlords were different. The Qing went through great pains to ensure metaphorical and physical overlordship of the Chinese people by enforcing the Q pigtail hairstyle over the Chinese. Unfortunately, many Chinese elites saw themselves as the same. For example, during the latter period of the Qing dynasty, Zheng Guofan would play a major part in putting down the Taiping rebellion in the name of his Manchu overlords. Most of the rank-and-file Manchus probably feared being taken over, as this would spell the end of their ascendancy and perhaps their safety. History would tell that they had little to fear, as the Han, reasserting themselves under the guise of republicanism and then communism, saw the royal family live out their lives in relative peace. The last emperor Puyi dying as late as the 1970s in Beijing. This is in stark contrast to the horrific murders of royal families under the so-called Bolshevists in Russia. At the same time, it does here say never lost a direct conflict with European powers about the Ming dynasty. Whilst this was true in the long run because their dynasty fell before the Qing had to give up territories such as Hong Kong to the Western powers and to Japan in the northeast, they were taken over by horsemen from the northeast, the Manchu, who were illiterate, only just years before their success. Unfortunately, at that point in time, the leadership had degenerated, with the last emperors living out their whole lives in the confines of the palace. This is in stark contrast to the founder, Zhuangzi of the Ming, who was orphaned as a boy, had fought in one of the many rebellions which took down the Mongolian Empire, and had his own very particular vision for China. As opposed to this, the Qing are said to be largely a naughty word, the Japanese and Europeans. This is probably largely accurate. The Qing were uninterested in learning anything before it was too late. In the late 1800s, some of the Qing rulers trying to modernize too little too late. As opposed to this, we have the comparison of the Ming being readily able to utilize European technology. Yes, the Ming borrowed from Westerners readily. For example, Matteo Ricci, the Catholic missionary, found that clocks were in particularly high demand, and his mapping techniques were highly sought after. His translations of Euclid's geometry and maths were pirated widely. It is therefore a shame that the Ming were met by the West on their downward spiral rather than ascendancy. Things may have turned out differently. It says here about the Qing Manchu lame hairstyle. Some of these points are a bit childish. At the same time, I do concur that this hairstyle does look a bit silly, and it says they smokes opium. Yes, indeed, the feeling of not being in control of one's own country made many people turn to drugs, among many other reasons. This is happening in other countries where the people are not in control of their own destiny. The Ming are said to strike fear into the Qing and Spanish even after their death. Now, this seems a tad exaggerated. The Ming were thoroughly wiped out in China by the Manchu Qing from the northeast, wiping all the way to the south. Unfortunately, this was done with the cooperation of many turncoats of the former Ming regime who worked with the incoming regime to save their skins or for position, etc. The Ming takeover would not have happened had the rank and file person known what had happened at the top. As I found out with the Ming Dynasty historian in my interview with her, Dr. Lynn Struve, most people had no idea what had happened. One of the questions that keep coming back to me as I was reading your book was just how often it seemed like the common folk may not have really even been aware of what had happened. So, for example, you have the example of Prince Regent announcing himself to the commoners, and many in the crowd speculating that he was a descendant of Yingzong, a Ming ruler who had been captured by the Mongols. So, like you were saying, many turncoats, Han Chinese, work with the Qing. The common folk would have had little interaction with the Manchu people, and they were off somewhere in a palace in the major cities across their country and leading the units, but they would not, many of them would have not known what really happened.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you never would even see your county magistrate. He would be in a palanquin with the shades all drawn down, and no one would ever get a look at him.
Ending trade with the Spanish, and therefore the Spanish Empire stagnating. I've seen theories about this, and there might be some truth, as the Spanish seemed to run out of silver, and getting enough was a big problem. However, it didn't stop the Dutch and East India companies. They really shouldn't have pushed opium, though. So compared to the rampant literary inquisition and suppression under the Qing, there's some truth to this. It's almost as if being an ethnic minority in rule has to, by definition, result in suppression of speech. The Ming produced many literary classics. This was probably the greatest legacy of the Ming. All the four great works of Chinese literature were composed during this era. Previously, the high-end novel had not been seen. Poetry was the medium of all previous high-end art. There were, of course, folk tales, but the literati saw poetry as the superior form. That is, until this time. To the Ming, we have to thank for the journey to the West, monkey, as it's known to Western audiences. Overall, due to the occasional exaggeration but largely accurate depiction of the stagnant Qing, I rate this meme a 4 out of 5 for accuracy.